Indian logic, known as Nyaya, refers to a philosophical system that focuses on the means of knowledge, reasoning, and valid inference. Nyaya is part of the 6 orthodox schools of Hindu philosophy and deals primarily with how knowledge is acquired, verified, and structured. One of its core components is the concept of pramana, which refers to the sources or means of knowledge. Understanding pramana is essential for analyzing logical reasoning, as it provides a framework to discern valid knowledge and invalidate erroneous beliefs. 1. Pramana, the means of knowledge. In Indian logic, pramana refers to the means of obtaining knowledge, or reliable sources of knowledge. There are 6 main pramanas, sources of valid knowledge, in Indian philosophy. Pratyaksa, perception. This is the direct perception of objects through the senses. It is the most immediate and fundamental source of knowledge. According to Indian logic, perception is the primary means of knowing the external world. It can be classified into ordinary perception based on the senses and extraordinary perception such as intuitive or mystic knowledge. For example, seeing a tree is a form of perception through the sense of sight. Anumana, inference. Anumana is the process of arriving at conclusions based on reasoning and inference. It is a form of indirect knowledge and is essential in Indian logic. The classic example is the inference of smoke on a mountain indicating the presence of fire, even though the fire itself is not visible. Anumana is divided into 3 main parts. Pravinya, the proposition or claim to be proven, e.g., there is fire. Hetu, the reason or grounds for the claim, e.g., there is smoke. Drstanta, the example or logical proof, e.g., wherever there is smoke, there is fire. Sabda, testimony. Sabda refers to the knowledge derived from verbal testimony or authoritative words. It is considered a secondary source of knowledge, and its validity depends on the reliability of the speaker or the source of information. Script texts, such as the Vedas, are often cited as a primary example of Sabda in Indian philosophy, as they are considered authoritative sources of knowledge. Upamana, comparison or analogy. Upamana is the means of knowledge that arises through analogy or comparison. In this form of reasoning, knowledge is gained by identifying similarities between 2 objects or situations. For example, if someone unfamiliar with an elephant is told that it is like a big cow, the person can infer what an elephant is like through the comparison. Arthapati, postulation or presumption. Arthapati is the means of knowledge that is used when something is inferred due to necessity or presumption, often in the absence of direct evidence. It refers to the process of deriving knowledge from the need to reconcile apparent contradictions or to fill in missing information. For instance, if a person is seen eating at night, but it is known that they are fasting during the day, it is inferred that the person must have eaten at night to preserve their health. Anupalavi, non-apprehension or absence of knowledge. Anupalavi refers to the knowledge derived from the non-apprehension of an object. It involves knowing the absence of something. This means that the lack of perception of an object is itself a form of knowledge. For example, knowing that there is no pot in the room because you have searched for it is a form of knowledge based on the absence of an object. 2. The role of pramana in logical reasoning. In Indian logic, reasoning is based on these 6 means of knowledge, and any valid argument must be grounded in one or more of them. The Nyaya system holds that for knowledge to be valid, it must adhere to certain rules of reasoning, and these rules help ensure that knowledge is both reliable and accurate. Each pramana serves to eliminate falsehoods and establish truth by providing evidence, whether through perception, analogy, or testimony. 3. Application of pramana in environmental science. In the context of environmental science, the means of knowledge outlined in Indian logic can be applied to research, data analysis, and problem solving. For instance, pratyaksa perception can be used in the direct observation of environmental phenomena, such as changes in weather patterns, biodiversity, or pollution levels. Anumana inference can help scientists make conclusions about environmental trends based on data, such as inferring the health of an ecosystem by observing certain indicators. Sabda testimony can refer to the knowledge shared through authoritative sources like research papers, government reports, or traditional ecological knowledge. Upamana comparison can help in drawing parallels between different ecosystems to understand potential environmental impacts in a new context. Arthapatpalation can assist in forming hypotheses about environmental phenomena that may not be directly observable, such as predicting the effects of climate change. Anupalavi non-apprehension can play a role in assessing what is absent in an ecosystem, such as the absence of certain species, which could indicate a loss in biodiversity. 4. Key points for the UGC NET exam. Understanding the means of knowledge pramanas in Indian logic is important for both theoretical and practical applications in various fields of study, including environmental science. The following points are essential for your exam preparation. Recognize and differentiate between the 6 pramanas. Be able to apply each pramana in evaluating environmental data or reasoning. Understand the role of Anumana and Sabda in research, especially when drawing conclusions from observed phenomena or authoritative sources. Learn to apply Upamana and Arthapati in comparative studies and hypothesis formulation in environmental research. Anupalavi provides an important method for identifying and understanding gaps in environmental knowledge. Previous year UGC NET questions with answers. Indian logic question 2023. Which of the following is not a pramana according to the Nyaya school? A. Pratyaksa. B. Anumana. C. Sabda. D. Sankhya. Answer. D. Sankhya. Year 2023 UGC NET paper 1. Question 2022. The method of gaining knowledge through inference is known as A. Pratyaksa. B. Anumana. C. Sabda. D. Arthapati. Answer. B. Anumana. Year 2022 UGC. B. Anumana. C. Sabda. D. Arthapati. Answer. B. Anumana. Year 2022 UGC NET paper 1. Question 2021. Which of the following is an example of Sabda as a pramana? A. An expert's testimony in an environmental case. B. The direct observation of a wildlife species. C. The non-apprehension of a certain species in an area. D. Inference based on ecological trends. Answer. A. An expert's testimony in an environmental case. Year 2021 UGC NET paper 1. Question 2020. The knowledge gained from the direct perception of an object is called A. Anupalavi. B. Pratyaksa. C. Upamana. D. Sabda. Answer, B. Pratyeksa, year, 2020 UGC Net Paper 1. Question 2019. Which pramana involves the knowledge gained from a non-apprehension of an object? A. Anupalabdhi. B. Anumanat C. Savdati. Pratyeksa. Answer, A. Anupalabdhi, year, 2019 UGC Net Paper 1. This lecture on Indian logic, means of knowledge, has provided a comprehensive understanding of the 6 pramanas and their relevance in logical reasoning and environmental science. By mastering these concepts, you can effectively approach UGC Net JRF exams and apply logical reasoning in your environmental studies. You said. Pramanas, Pratyaksha perception, ChatGPT said. Here's a detailed lecture on pramana, Pratyaksha perception tailored for UGC Net JRF environmental science, following your specific requirements for maximum word limit, elaborate explanation, and note tables. Pramana, Pratyaksha perception. Indian logic, the term pramana refers to the valid sources or means of knowledge. One of the key pramanas is Pratyaksa, which translates to perception. Pratyaksa is regarded as the most direct and immediate source of knowledge in Indian philosophy. It is the means through which individuals acquire information about the external world through their sensory experiences. This empirical knowledge forms the foundation of various logical arguments and reasoning in both traditional Indian philosophy and modern environmental science research. 1. Definition and scope of Pratyaksa. Pratyaksa is the process by which knowledge is gained through direct sensory experience. It is the immediate experience of an object or event through the 5 senses: sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. In Indian philosophy, this form of knowledge is considered to be the most reliable and unambiguous, as it is directly obtained without the need for intermediary inferences or interpretations. However, it is important to understand that Pratyaksa is not merely passive sensory input, it is an active process of cognition and interpretation. The mind processes the sensory data and gives meaning to the raw input received from the external world. The reliability of Pratyaksa thus depends on the accuracy and clarity of sensory perception, and it may be influenced by various factors, such as attention, awareness, and context. 2. Types of Pratyaksa perception. In Indian logic, Pratyaksa can be categorized into 2 main types. Ordinary perception, Laukika Pratyaksa. This is the everyday, sensory perception that we experience in our daily lives. It is the perception we gain through the normal functioning of our senses. For example, seeing a tree or hearing the sound of water are forms of ordinary perception. Ordinary perception is further divided into external and internal perception. External perception. This includes seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling objects in the external environment. Internal perception. This refers to the perception of the internal world, such as emotions, thoughts, or the feeling of hunger. Extraordinary perception, Alaukika Pratyaksa. This type of perception transcends the usual sensory faculties. It includes forms of perception that may be mystical, spiritual, or intuitive. For instance, a person may claim to perceive certain events or objects that are beyond the reach of ordinary sensory experience, such as clairvoyance or intuition. While such forms of perception are debated in the context of modern philosophy, they have historically been considered valid sources of knowledge in some Indian traditions. 3. Perception in the environmental science context. In the field of environmental science, Pratyaksa perception plays a significant role in the direct observation of environmental phenomena. Many environmental researchers rely on direct sensory data to observe and analyze changes in ecosystems, climate, and species behavior. For example, scientists might directly observe changes in weather patterns, such as increased temperatures or rainfall. The health of ecosystems by observing plant growth, animal activity, or water quality. Evidence of pollution by perceiving contaminants in the air, water, or soil. In this context, Pratyaksa forms the initial step in data collection, which is later supplemented by other pramanas, such as Anumana inference and Savda testimony, to establish a comprehensive understanding of environmental issues. The reliability of Pratyaksa in environmental science is crucial, but it is important to recognize its limitations. For instance, human sensory perception can be affected by bias, cultural background, or interpretive differences, which could lead to erroneous conclusions unless corroborated by other forms of evidence. 4. The role of Pratyaksa in validating knowledge. The knowledge derived from Pratyaksa is considered prima facie valid because it is based on direct experience. However, to establish its validity, it must meet the following conditions. Clarity, the object of perception must be clearly discernible by the senses. Concentration, the mind must be focused and not distracted. Reliability of the senses, the sensory organs must function normally and not be impaired or affected by external factors, e.g., poor lighting or noise. In environmental science, the reliability of perception can be verified by reproducibility. For instance, if multiple researchers independently observe the same environmental phenomenon under similar conditions and report consistent results, the perception is deemed reliable and valid. This empirical evidence forms the basis for scientific reasoning and environmental policymaking. 5. Limitations of Pratyaksa. Despite being considered a primary source of knowledge, Pratyaksa has its limitations. Subjectivity. Different individuals may perceive the same object differently based on their sensory abilities, emotional states, and cognitive processes. Illusions. Perception can be influenced by optical or cognitive illusions, leading to distorted knowledge, e.g., seeing a mirage in a desert. Sensory limits. The human senses have limitations, such as the inability to perceive objects beyond certain wavelengths of light, e.g., ultraviolet or infrared, or sounds outside the audible frequency range. In T. Pramana, Pratyaksa perception. In Indian logic, the term pramana refers to the valid sources or means of knowledge. One of the key pramanas is Pratyaksa, which translates to perception. Pratyaksa is regarded as the most direct and immediate source of knowledge in Indian philosophy. It is the means through which individuals acquire information about the external world through their sensory experiences. This empirical knowledge forms the foundation of various logical arguments and reasoning in both traditional Indian philosophy and modern environmental science research. 1. Definition and scope of Pratyaksa. Pratyaksa is the process by which knowledge is gained through direct sensory experience. It is the immediate experience of an object or event through the 5 senses: sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. In Indian philosophy, this form of knowledge is considered to be the most reliable and unambiguous, as it is directly obtained without the need for intermediary inferences or interpretations. However, it is important to understand that Pratyaksa is not merely passive sensory input, it is an active process of cognition and interpretation. The mind processes the sensory data and gives meaning to the raw input received from the external world. The reliability of Pratyaksa thus depends on the accuracy and clarity of sensory perception, and it may be influenced by various factors, such as attention, awareness, and context. 2. Types of pratyeksa perception. In Indian logic, pratyeksa can be categorized into two main types. Ordinary perception, Laukika pratyeksa. This is the everyday, sensory perception that we experience in our daily lives. It is the perception we gain through the normal functioning of our senses. For example, seeing a tree or hearing the sound of water are forms of ordinary perception. Ordinary perception is further divided into external and internal perception. External perception. This includes seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling objects in the external environment. Internal perception. This refers to the perception of the internal world, such as emotions, thoughts, or the feeling of hunger. Extraordinary perception, Alaukika pratyeksa. This type of perception transcends the usual sensory faculties. It includes forms of perception that may be mystical, spiritual, or intuitive. For instance, a person may claim to perceive certain events or objects that are beyond the reach of ordinary sensory experience, such as clairvoyance or intuition. While such forms of perception are debated in the context of modern philosophy, they have historically been considered valid sources of knowledge in some Indian traditions. 3. Perception in the environmental science context. In the field of environmental science, pratyeksa perception plays a significant role in the direct observation of environmental phenomena. Many environmental researchers rely on direct sensory data to observe and analyze changes in ecosystems, climate, and species behavior. For example, scientists might directly observe changes in weather patterns, such as increased temperatures or rainfall, the health of ecosystems by observing plant growth, animal activity, or water quality, evidence of pollution by perceiving contaminants in the air, water, or soil. In this context, pratyeksa forms the initial step in data collection, which is later supplemented by other pramanas, such as Anumana inference and Sabda testimony, to establish a comprehensive understanding of environmental issues. The reliability of pratyeksa in environmental science is crucial, but it is important to recognize its limitations. For instance, human sensory perception can be affected by bias, cultural background, or interpretive differences, which could lead to erroneous conclusions unless corroborated by other forms of evidence. 4. The role of pratyeksa in validating knowledge. The knowledge derived from pratyeksa is considered prima facie valid because it is based on direct experience. However, to establish its validity, it must meet the following conditions. Clarity. The object of perception must be clearly discernible by the senses. Concentration. The mind must be focused and not distracted. Reliability of the senses. The sensory organs must function normally and not be impaired or affected by external factors, e.g., poor lighting or noise. In environmental science, the reliability of perception can be verified by reproducibility. For instance, if multiple researchers independently observe the same environmental phenomenon under similar conditions and report consistent results, the perception is deemed reliable and valid. This empirical evidence forms the basis for scientific reasoning and environmental policymaking. 5. Limitations of pratyeksa. Despite being considered a primary source of knowledge, pratyeksa has its limitations. Subjectivity. Different individuals may perceive the same object differently based on their sensory abilities, emotional states, and cognitive processes. Illusions. Perception can be influenced by optical or cognitive illusions, leading to distorted knowledge, e.g., seeing a mirage in a desert. Sensory limits. The human senses have limitations, such as the inability to perceive objects beyond certain wavelengths of light, e.g., ultraviolet or infrared, or sounds outside the audible frequency range. In the context of environmental science, these limitations can be addressed through instrumentation, such as the use of telescopes, microscopes, or sensors to extend the range of human perception. Additionally, statistical methods can be employed to account for variability in perceptual data, ensuring more accurate conclusions. 6. Previous year UGC Net questions with answers. Question 2023. According to Indian logic, which of the following is considered the primary source of knowledge? A. Anumana. B. Pratyeksa. C. Sabda. D. Artha. The answer. B. Pratyeksa. Year 2023 UGC Net Paper 1. Question 2022. Which of the following best represents the concept of pratyeksa in Indian logic? A. The knowledge gained through reasoning. B. The knowledge obtained through direct sensory experience. C. The knowledge derived from authoritative texts. D. The knowledge obtained from analogy. Answer. B. The knowledge obtained through direct sensory experience. Year 2022 UGC Net Paper 1. Question 2021. Pratyeksa, as a means of knowledge, is classified into which of the following? A. Ordinary and extraordinary perception. B. Internal and external perception. C. Sensory and intellectual perception. D. Primary and secondary perception. Answer. A. Ordinary and extraordinary perception. Year 2021 UGC Net Paper 1. Question 2020. Which of the following types of knowledge is derived through pratyeksa in environmental science? A. The perception of environmental changes like temperature rise. B. Theoretical models of climate change. C. Predictions based on previous trends. D. Hypothetical scenarios of species extinction. Answer. A. The perception of environmental changes like temperature rise. Year 2020 UGC Net Paper 1. Conclusion. Pratyeksa perception is the most fundamental source of knowledge in Indian logic, playing a crucial role in both philosophical inquiry and scientific research. In environmental science, it serves as the starting point for observing and understanding natural phenomena. By acknowledging its importance and limitations, and combining it with other means of knowledge, researchers can develop a comprehensive understanding of environmental issues, aiding in better decision-making and policy formulation. This lecture, along with the previous year questions, will help you grasp the core concepts related to pratyeksa and apply them to the UGC Net JRF exam in environmental science. You said. Anumana inference. ChatGPT said. Anumana inference. Anumana is a key pramana, means of knowledge, in Indian logic, commonly translated as inference. It is the process of deriving knowledge about an object or phenomenon that is not directly perceived, but rather inferred through logical reasoning from what is known or directly observed. In other words, Anumana involves drawing conclusions based on established premises, making it an essential tool for understanding the world around us when direct perception, pratyeksa, is not possible or sufficient. In Indian philosophy, Anumana is one of the most significant sources of knowledge, alongside pratyeksa perception, and is extensively used to infer truths that are beyond the immediate reach of sensory perception. It is particularly useful in complex areas such as environmental science, where many phenomena cannot be observed directly but can be inferred through indirect evidence or scientific models. 1. Definition of Anumana. Anumana refers to a type of knowledge that is derived through logical reasoning from already known facts. It is based on the principle of conditionality, where an inference is made from a universal proposition, known to be true in all cases, and a particular instance, a specific case or example. The basic structure of an inference involves a general rule and a specific observation that aligns with that rule, leading to a conclusion. For example, if we know that all humans are mortal, general proposition, and we observe that Socrates is a human, specific instance, we can infer that Socrates is mortal, conclusion. This process of inference is fundamental to how we gain knowledge about the world, especially when we cannot directly observe every aspect of the phenomena in question. 2. Types of anumana. In Indian logic, anumana is classified into different types, based on the nature of the inference. The most important classification involves three members, triguna, also known as the three-term structure of inference, which consists of Pratyanyak proposition, the statement or the hypothesis that we want to prove or infer. Hetu, reason, the reason or evidence that supports the proposition. Conclusion, sadhya, the result or what we want to infer or prove based on the reason. This structure is fundamental to the process of inference, both in classical Indian philosophy and in modern scientific reasoning. Example. Pratyanyak proposition, all plants need water to grow. Hetu, reason, this plant is growing. Sadhya, conclusion, therefore, this plant must be receiving water. Anumana can be further divided into two categories based on the manner in which the inference is made. Upamana, inference is based on analogy or comparison. For example, if you know that a tiger and a lion are both mammals and share certain characteristics, you can infer that another similar animal will likely share those same characteristics. Anvayagyatyarki, inference is based on the relationship of presence and absence, causal reasoning. This is the process where we infer a cause-effect relationship by observing the presence or absence of certain conditions. 3. Types of inference in Indian logic. In Indian philosophy, particularly the Nyaya school, anumana is divided into the following four types, based on the method of reasoning. Sadhya Hetu inference, direct inference, this is the simplest form of inference, where a universal proposition is inferred from a specific observation. Example, all swans are white, general rule, right pointing arrow, this swan is white, specific observation. Bhakti, universal connection or permeation, this involves the inherent relationship between a reason, Hetu, and the conclusion, sadhya, that is universally applicable. Example, where there is smoke, there must be fire, Vyapti is the universal connection between smoke and fire. Karya Hetu inference, causal inference, this refers to drawing conclusions based on the principle of causality. We infer that something exists because a cause exists. Example, if a plant is wilting and we infer that it lacks water, this is based on the cause-effect relationship between lack of water and wilting. Guna Hetu inference, quality-based inference, this type of inference draws conclusions based on the properties or qualities of a subject. Example, observing that an object is shiny and inferring that it is made of metal because metals are generally shiny. 4. Prerequisites for valid inference. For an inference to be valid in Indian logic, certain conditions must be met. These include Vyapti, there must be a necessary and universal connection between the reason, Hetu, and the conclusion, sadhya. Sadhya conclusion, the conclusion must be possible and must logically follow from the reason. Hetu, reason, the reason must be an adequate cause or evidence to support the conclusion. The reason must not be invalid, ambiguous, or fallacious. Anupalabhi, non-perception, the non-perception of the opposite of the conclusion, absence of an opposite. 5. Anumana in environmental science. In environmental science, anumana plays a crucial role, especially when direct observation is not possible due to the scale, rarity, or complexity of certain environmental phenomena. For instance, scientists often rely on inference to understand the impacts of climate change, ecosystem dynamics, or pollution. For example, if scientists observe a decrease in biodiversity in an area with increased industrial activity, they may infer a causal relationship between the two, i.e., industrial activity leads to reduced biodiversity. Similarly, they might infer the presence of pollutants in a water body based on certain environmental factors, such as increased turbidity or fish mortality, without directly measuring the pollutants. Thus, anumana enables scientific reasoning to make predictions, form hypotheses, and infer relationships between variables in environmental science. 6. Previous year UGC Net questions with answers. Question 2023. In the process of inference, which term refers to the reason or evidence that supports the proposition? A. Hetu. B. Pratyanyak seat sadhya D. Vyapti answer. A. Hetu. Year 2023 UGC Net paper 1. Question 2022. Which of the following best exemplifies anumana in environmental science? A. Observing the color of the water and inferring its chemical composition. B. Directly measuring the temperature of the water. C. Reading historical data about weather patterns. D. Listening to environmental reports about climate change. Answer. A. Observing the color of the water and inferring its chemical composition. Year 2022 UGC Net paper 1. Question 2021. What is the term used to describe the universal connection between the reason and the conclusion in anumana? A. Vyapti. B. Hetu seat sadhya D. Pratyanyak answer. A. Vyapti. Year 2021 UGC Net paper 1. Question 2020. Which of the following is an example of causal inference, Karya Hetu, in environmental studies? A. Inferring that deforestation leads to soil erosion. B. Observing a wetland ecosystem and inferring the presence of migratory birds. C. Using historical data to predict climate change. D. Analyzing the biodiversity of a forest and inferring its health. Answer. A. Inferring that deforestation leads to soil erosion. Year 2020 UGC Net paper 1. Conclusion. Anumana inference is a critical pramana for gaining knowledge beyond direct sensory experience. In environmental science, it allows researchers to draw logical conclusions about ecological phenomena that cannot be observed directly, using scientific reasoning and evidence. Understanding structure, types, and applications of anumana is essential for both philosophical reasoning and scientific research, and mastering it will greatly assist you in answering related questions in the UGC Net JRF Environmental Science exam. You said, Upamana comparison, ChatGPT said, Upamana comparison. Upamana, also known as comparison, is one of the key pramanas, means of knowledge, in Indian logic. It refers to the process of gaining knowledge about an object, concept, or phenomenon by comparing it with another object or concept that is already known or understood. It is a method of inference that relies on the similarities between two entities, leading to the understanding of one based on the known characteristics of the other. This form of knowledge acquisition is especially valuable when direct observation or perception is limited or when the subject being studied is unfamiliar. In Indian philosophy, Upamana holds great significance as a means of obtaining knowledge and understanding relationships between various entities or phenomena. Upamana operates on the basis of analogy, where we infer the properties of an unknown object by comparing it with a known object that shares similar characteristics. 1. Definition of Upamana. In simple terms, Upamana is the process of understanding something unknown by comparing it with something known. This type of reasoning is crucial when trying to infer the qualities or attributes of a new or unfamiliar object based on its resemblance to something we already know. Example, suppose you encounter a creature in the forest that you have never seen before. However, it has certain physical features like a long neck, spots on its body, and a similar body structure to a giraffe. By using Upamana, you might infer that this new creature is likely a species of giraffe, even if you haven't directly identified it. The comparison between the new creature and the known giraffe leads to this inference. In essence, Upamana is based on the assumption that if two objects share similar characteristics, they likely share other characteristics as well. 2. The structure of Upamana. The reasoning process of Upamana follows a simple structure. Known object pramana, this is the object or concept that is well understood, and its properties or characteristics are established. Unknown object pramanya, this is the object or phenomenon that is not yet understood or familiar. Similarity or analogy, sadrasya, the similarities between the known and unknown object are identified and compared. Conclusion, based on the similarities, knowledge about the unknown object is inferred. Example. Known object, the cheetah is a fast-moving animal. Unknown object, the lion has similar body structure and movement patterns to the cheetah. Similarity, both animals are large carnivores with similar limb structure and body shape. Conclusion, the lion is likely to be fast as well, based on its similarity to the cheetah. 3. Types of Upamana. In Indian philosophy, Upamana can be categorized into two types based on the manner of comparison. Sadharana Upamana, generalized comparison, this is a comparison where the characteristics of one object are generalized and applied to another object based on the shared traits. This form of comparison is most common when one is inferring something about a familiar object that shares properties with a known object. Example, a bat is similar to a bird because it has wings and flies. We infer that the bat shares characteristics with birds, such as flying. Vaishya Upamana, specific comparison, this involves comparing a specific property or characteristic of an object to a known object in a very focused manner. This is a more specific type of comparison, often used when trying to understand a particular feature of an unknown object by relating it to a similar, more familiar one. Example, a newly discovered fruit may have a shape, color, and texture that resemble those of an apple. In this case, we use the analogy to infer that the new fruit may also taste somewhat similar to an apple. 4. Importance of Upamana in knowledge acquisition. In Indian logic, Upamana plays a crucial role, especially in fields like environmental science and biology, where scientists frequently draw inferences based on the comparison of known species or ecological systems with newly discovered ones. By comparing environmental conditions, species behaviors, and ecological interactions, researchers can better understand complex phenomena. For instance, Upamana is often used when studying new species in an ecosystem. If scientists observe an organism with similar features to another well-known organism, they can make certain assumptions about its behavior, habitat, or dietary preferences, aiding in research and conservation efforts. Example in environmental science. If a new species is discovered in a tropical rainforest with similar characteristics to an existing species known to thrive in the same environment, Upamana might help scientists infer that the new plant could have similar ecological requirements, such as temperature, humidity, and soil composition. 5. Previous year UGC Net questions with answers. Question 2023. Which of the following is an example of Upamana comparison as a means of knowledge in environmental science? A. Inferring that a species of tree is likely to thrive in similar conditions as another species with the same physical traits. B. Measuring the temperature and humidity levels of a forest ecosystem. C. Observing the migration pattern of birds based on historical data. D. Analyzing soil composition in a specific location. Answer. A. Inferring that a species of tree is likely to thrive in similar conditions as another species with the same physical traits. Year, 2023 UGC Net Paper 1. Question 2022. What is the key concept in Upamana comparison as used in Indian logic? A. Knowledge gained through sensory perception. B. Knowledge gained through analogy or similarity between objects. C. Knowledge gained through empirical data collection. D. Knowledge gained through historical records. Answer. B. Knowledge gained through analogy or similarity between objects. Year, 2022 UGC Net Paper 1. Question 2021. If a new species of bird is observed to have wings and feathers similar to those of a known bird, which logical method is being used to infer its characteristics? A. Anumana, inference. B. Upamana comparison. C. Pratyaksa, perception. D. Pramana, authority. Answer. B. Upamana comparison. Year, 2021 UGC Net Paper 1. Question 2020. In which of the following scenarios does Upamana best apply? A. Observing the color of water and concluding its chemical composition. B. Comparing a newly discovered plant's characteristics with a known species to infer its properties. C. Using chemical analysis to determine the presence of pollutants in soil. D. Studying the temperature variations in an ecosystem over time. Answer. B. Comparing a newly discovered plant's characteristics with a known species to infer its properties. Year, 2020 UGC Net Paper 1. Conclusion. Upamana comparison is an essential means of knowledge in Indian logic, particularly useful in fields such as environmental science where direct observation may not always be possible. By comparing an unknown object with a known one, we can infer its characteristics, behavior, and properties. Understanding the process of Upamana and applying it to real-world problems, such as ecological research and species conservation, is key to gaining insights into complex environmental systems. Mastery of this concept will significantly aid in preparing for the UGC Net JRF Environmental Science exam. You said. Shabda verbal testimony. ChatGPT said. Shabda verbal testimony. Shabda, or verbal testimony, is one of the crucial pramanas, means of knowledge in Indian philosophy and logic. It refers to the knowledge acquired through the word or verbal communication of a reliable, authoritative source. In essence, Shabda is knowledge that comes to us via speech, writings, or other forms of verbal expression, provided the source of this knowledge is trustworthy and recognized as authoritative. This means of knowledge relies on the credibility of the speaker or the text from which the knowledge is derived. In Indian traditions, Shabda is often associated with sacred texts like the Vedas or the words of saints, scholars, or experts in a particular field. Shabda does not depend on direct perception or inference but on the testimony of someone who has direct access to the truth of the matter. 1. Definition and understanding of Shabda. Shabda can be defined as the knowledge derived from an authoritative verbal source, be it human testimony or sacred scriptures. It is a form of indirect knowledge, where the content of what is known is communicated by someone who is perceived to be an expert or holder of valid knowledge. For example, when a scholar in a field of study explains a complex concept, a student gains knowledge through the Shabda of the scholar. Similarly, ancient texts that communicate spiritual, moral, or scientific truths are regarded as authoritative sources of Shabda in Indian philosophy. In Indian philosophy, Shabda is treated as one of the valid means of knowledge pramanas because it allows us to gain knowledge that might not be directly perceivable or inferable. It works on the principle that an authoritative and reliable source can be trusted to communicate true and valid knowledge. 2. The nature of Shabda. The concept of Shabda is crucial because it covers a wide range of verbal knowledge that comes from a variety of sources, such as Vedas and other sacred texts. These are considered the most authoritative sources of Shabda in Indian traditions. The Vedas, for example, were regarded as direct revelations of truth, aparasaya, and the knowledge contained within them is considered free from human error. Testimony of reliable persons. Any knowledgeable, trustworthy individual who speaks the truth based on their own experience or expertise can serve as a valid source of Shabda. This could be a teacher, a philosopher, or even a scientific expert. Scriptures, books, and recorded knowledge. Written texts and scriptures that are well recognized for their truthfulness and accuracy serve as a form of Shabda. These texts may include philosophical treatises, scientific manuals, or religious texts that are considered authoritative. 3. Types of Shabda. There are two main types of Shabda in Indian philosophy. Vedika Shabda, Vedic or scriptural testimony. This refers to the knowledge gained from the Vedas, Upanishads, and other sacred texts. It is the highest form of Shabda in Hindu philosophy. The Vedas are believed to be divinely revealed and free from error, and thus knowledge from these texts is regarded as absolute truth. Example, the Vedic texts explain the nature of the universe, the concept of the self, Atman, and the process of creation. The truths in these texts are considered to be beyond human error and are accepted as ultimate knowledge. Laukika Shabda, worldly testimony. It refers to the knowledge gained from worldly or non-scriptural sources. These can include the testimony of scholars, scientific discoveries, historical accounts, and other forms of knowledge that are passed down through reliable sources. While Laukika Shabda is valid and important, it is considered to be inferior to Vedika Shabda. Example, a book by a well-known scientist explaining a theory in physics or a historian narrating events of the past is considered Laukika Shabda. While these sources may be trustworthy and authoritative in their domain, they do not carry the same weight as the Vedas in Indian philosophy. 4. Characteristics of Shabda. For Shabda to be considered a valid source of knowledge, certain conditions must be met. Reliability of the source. The person or scripture providing the information must be a recognized authority on the subject matter. The source must be truthful and credible, with a proven track record of accuracy. Clarity and consistency. The testimony or communication must be clear, consistent, and unambiguous. Conflicting or confusing verbal testimony would not qualify as valid Shabda. Direct connection with truth. The information conveyed must directly correspond to the truth. For example, the teachings of an enlightened teacher or the revelations in sacred texts are believed to be directly aligned with the truth and free from error. 5. Application of Shabda in knowledge acquisition. In practical terms, Shabda plays a vital role in acquiring knowledge across various fields, including religion and spirituality. Religious knowledge, especially in Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism, is often passed down through the teachings of saints, sages, and scriptures. In this context, Shabda is used to convey spiritual truths that cannot be directly perceived or inferred through senses or logic. Science and history. In modern contexts, scientific theories and historical events are often conveyed through books, research papers, and expert testimony. Shabda allows individuals to learn from the expertise and research of others, expanding knowledge across generations. Education and learning. In the educational system, Shabda plays an essential role as knowledge is transmitted from teachers to students. The credibility of the teacher and the clarity of the communication are paramount in this form of learning. 6. Previous year UGC Net questions with answers. Question 2023. Which of the following is an example of Shabda? Verbal testimony is a means of acquiring knowledge. A. Inferring the behavior of a new animal species based on previous research studies. B. Learning about ancient traditions through the study of religious texts. C. Observing the patterns of rainfall in a particular region over a year. D. Measuring the concentration of pollutants in air samples. Answer. B. Learning about ancient traditions through the study of religious texts. Year, 2023 UGC Net Paper 1. Question 2022. Which of the following is considered the highest form of Shabda in Indian philosophy? A. The testimony of a reliable scientist. B. The teachings of a spiritual leader or sage. C. The study of scientific data. D. The perception of natural phenomena. Answer. B. The teachings of a spiritual leader or sage. Year, 2022 UGC Net Paper 1. Question 2021. What is the main difference between Vedika Shabda and Laukika Shabda? A. Vedika Shabda is based on human perception, while Laukika Shabda is based on scriptural sources. B. Vedika Shabda is considered more authoritative and pertains to spiritual knowledge, while Laukika Shabda pertains to worldly knowledge. C. Vedika Shabda is based on observation, while Laukika Shabda is based on verbal communication. D. Vedika Shabda is subjective, while Laukika Shabda is objective. Answer. B. Vedika Shabda is considered more authoritative and pertains to spiritual knowledge, while Laukika Shabda pertains to worldly knowledge. Year, 2021 UGC Net Paper 1. Question 2020. According to Indian logic, which of the following is Shabda as a means of knowledge? A. Inference based on prior experience. B. Direct observation of the external world. C. Learning from an authoritative figure or text. D. Estimation based on empirical data. Answer. C. Learning from an authoritative figure or text. Year, 2020 UGC Net Paper 1. Conclusion. Shabda verbal testimony is an essential means of acquiring knowledge in Indian philosophy, especially when direct perception or inference is not possible. Knowledge obtained through Shabda is deemed valid, provided it originates from a reliable and authoritative source. This form of knowledge acquisition is critical in fields like religion, science, history, and education. Understanding the nuances of Shabda and its role in epistemology can be invaluable for cracking the UGC Net JRF environmental science exam. You said. Arthopathy implication. ChatGPT said. Arthopathy implication. Arthopathy, also known as implication, is one of the important pramanas, means of knowledge, in Indian philosophy, particularly in Nyaya and Mimamsa schools. It is a means of knowledge that arises when a certain fact or statement can be logically inferred from the context or a set of facts, even though the fact is not directly perceived or explicitly stated. Arthopathy is often referred to as presumption or postulation because it involves inferring an unobserved fact based on the available evidence. In simpler terms, arthopathy works when there is a need to fill a gap in knowledge based on indirect evidence, which leads to a logical implication. This is a unique method of reasoning where we deduce a conclusion because the absence of that conclusion would lead to a contradiction or an impossibility. 1. Definition and understanding of orthopathie. Orthopathie is defined as the inference of an event or a situation that has not been directly observed but is logically inferred to be true based on other known facts. It is used when there is no direct observation or testimony available, but the conclusion is necessary to make sense of the facts at hand. The term implication refers to the logical necessity of the inferred fact in the given context. For example, if it is known that a person is not visible during the day, yet the person has a daily routine that necessitates their presence at certain places, we might infer through orthopathie that the person must be present at those places at night, even though we have not directly observed this. 2. The nature of orthopathie. In orthopathie, the implication or presumption is based on logical necessity. The basic structure of reasoning in orthopathie is as follows. There is a situation where a certain fact is not observed directly. However, this fact is implied by the known facts or circumstances. The conclusion is necessary to explain the observed facts and prevent contradictions. For instance, in the example of a person who is not seen during the day but is known to be engaged in a certain activity, like working, the only logical explanation is that the person is performing this activity at night. This conclusion is drawn from orthopathie because there is no direct observation of their nighttime activities. 3. Examples of orthopathie implication. Example 1. A person is known to be sick and has no food at home. However, it is evident that they are able to continue living. From this, it can be inferred that the person is likely receiving food from somewhere else. This presumption or implication is orthopathie because the conclusion about the person obtaining food is logically necessary to explain their survival, even though it was not directly observed. Example 2. Suppose you know that a person was absent from a location during the daytime. Based on their usual schedule, it is implied that they must be present at the location at night, even though this was never directly observed. Here, the implication is that their absence during the day necessarily implies their presence at night. 4. Characteristics of orthopathie. The key characteristics of orthopathie are: implied knowledge. The knowledge gained through orthopathie is implied rather than directly perceived. It is inferred from the facts at hand, and this inference is necessary for the understanding of the situation. Logical necessity. The inference made by orthopathie is logically necessary. If the inferred fact did not exist, the known facts would contradict each other. Absence of direct perception. Unlike direct perception, pratyaksha, or inference, anumana, orthopathie is not based on direct sensory experience but on a logical assumption that explains the situation. Filling gaps in knowledge. Orthopathie helps fill gaps in knowledge where there is insufficient direct evidence but the situation logically necessitates a certain conclusion. 5. The role of orthopathie in epistemology. In epistemology, orthopathie plays a crucial role in helping individuals draw conclusions in situations where direct evidence or observation is unavailable. It allows for logical reasoning in circumstances where sensory perception is either impossible or insufficient to explain a given situation. It can also help explain phenomena or situations that otherwise seem puzzling, by drawing on indirect evidence and logical necessity. 6. Applications of orthopathie in different domains. Philosophy and metaphysics. In philosophical discussions, orthopathie can be used to make metaphysical inferences. For instance, a person's inner state, like desires or thoughts, cannot be directly observed, but their actions and behavior imply these internal states. Hence, we infer the existence of these inner states based on their actions. Logic and reasoning. In logic, orthopathie is used to solve problems where certain facts must be presupposed in order to make sense of the given premises. For example, if a person is always seen coming from a certain direction at a particular time, it might be inferred that they are traveling along that route regularly, even though it is not directly observed. Law and testimonies. In legal reasoning, orthopathie can be used when there is no direct evidence of an event but the facts at hand logically imply that it occurred. This could be used in cases where indirect evidence, such as the timing of an event, leads to the conclusion that something must have happened. 7. Previous year UGC Net questions with answers. Question 2023. Which of the following best exemplifies orthopathie? Implication as a means of acquiring knowledge. A. Inferring the presence of an invisible object based on its effects. B. Concluding that a person is absent based on their habitual actions. C. Using a map to infer the shortest route to a destination. D. Determining the age of a tree based on its rings. Answer. A. Inferring the presence of an invisible object based on its effects. Year, 2023 UGC Net Paper 1. Question 2022. In Indian logic, orthopathie is used to infer a fact that is A. Directly observed. B. Logically necessary to explain a set of facts. C. Derived from scripture or testimony. D. Based on direct experience. Answer. B. Logically necessary to explain a set of facts. Year, 2022 UGC Net Paper 1. Question 2021. Which of the following scenarios is an example of orthopathie? A. A student concluding the content of a book based on its title. B. A person inferring the weather based on the change in air pressure. Answer. D. A person assuming that an absent friend must be at home because they were expected. Here, 2021 UGC Net Paper 1. Conclusion. Orthopathie implication is a unique pramana in Indian philosophy that allows us to infer knowledge logically from the available facts, even when direct evidence is not present. It plays a critical role in situations where knowledge gaps exist, helping to make sense of complex situations through logical implication. Understanding orthopathie is essential for grasping how we form conclusions based on indirect evidence, and its applications span across various domains such as logic, philosophy, law, and everyday reasoning. This means of knowledge is an important tool to have in your preparation for the UGC Net JRF Environmental Science exam.